2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It was a momentous bye week as I spent my time out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with baseball games starting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This guy was watching all sorts of World Series activity. He is a longtime Major League Baseball insider, one time running lots of things about the Baltimore Orioles in the 80s and into the 90s and the Texas Rangers. Currently doing the sports professorial work and all sorts of consulting as my sports business pal at Georgetown University. I don't lecture his classes, but I did lecture a class at Mount St. Mary's last week about Masson and money, and I did bring your name up, so if you watch about 38 minutes in, I use your name in vain at some point for not allowing me to lecture your class. Marty Conway is here. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can find him on Twitter. You can find him at a parade near you somewhere off Constitution Avenue. A hell of a turn of events, Marty Conway. I'm going to let you just take over and give me your thoughts, but I'm going to take a deep dive with you on this because I got a lot on my mind.
Well, first of all, yes, I did see that you lectured for Mount St. Mary's, and yes, was I jealous? So I'm going to say it here publicly. You have an open invitation, which I'll make it a formal invitation before too long, so that you can share that or anything else.
Georgetown? That's almost Ivy League. I'm not worthy of that, you know? I'm not worthy of that.
You're like me. I happen to work at places I could never have gotten into as a student, so for sure. Yeah. But yeah, so we're talking about what's changed, what's transpired. Look, what transpired in the month of October in baseball, it's just the nature of baseball. Baseball is, even though there are analytics, 162 regular season games, countless other games, exhibition, spring training, you name it, it is the most unpredictable of the sports, and that's what frustrates people because with all of this data, and I know people today are going to be, or now are going to be, praying at the church of Sig Mejdal and Mike Elias, but at the end of the day, what the Nationals did proves beyond a reasonable doubt, 3 times facing elimination games in the 7th or 8th inning being trailing and winning. There's just something a little more mythical about baseball than there is about other sports, and that's what experienced in the southern part of Howard County, Anne Arundel County, PG, Montgomery County, all gathering around what the Nationals did. And it is remarkable what the World Series has become. It hasn't been here in Baltimore forever, but the scope and scale of now the World Series, and you add a presidential visit into it and a number of other things, it is concentric circles and rings that go far, far beyond what has happened before. So when and if there is an opportunity for the World Series to get close or come to Baltimore again, I think what people will understand is the scale of the event and the enterprise that has become is 10 or 20 or 30 times what it was the last time the Orioles were in it.
Yeah, I went to a lot of World Series games between 93, obviously didn't go in 94, and let's say about 2005. Right after I got married, I kind of stopped going. And quite frankly, in October in our market, that's right around the time people stopped caring about baseball. Years 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the Perlazzo years, the Hargrove, all that stuff, that there was no reason for me to be on the field at a Red Sox game in October when the Ravens were playing the Browns this weekend. There was no longer a calling for it for me. And the Nationals thing, I want to go back to the beginning for you. You were a part of getting Camden Yards built. And I had never thought about the Nationals winning the World Series. Not even when they were in the playoffs 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. It never occurred to me what it would do to Baltimore and what it would mean for baseball in the DMV. And I would think that when Camden Yards was built, you and Larry were doing this, and Governor Schaefer was putting this together, the notion that Camden Yards would be built would be an insurance policy that there would never be baseball in D.C., right?
Yeah, moving it from where it was and tucking it just off the expressways, the highways, all those things was, as in your words, an insurance policy. It certainly made it less likely because then the overtures to Major League Baseball from the Orioles, whoever owned them at the time, the process was, hey, people from Washington can get here, even though it's 28, 38 miles maybe to where you want to build a stadium. you don't really need to do that because it's easy to get here. So it was certainly a part of the mix. It made Baltimore more accessible to Washington in terms of fans, for sure. And then there was the satisfaction that once it was up and running, it was such a satisfactory experience for everybody in baseball around the country that there would really be no need to have one, look elsewhere, look to Portland, look to Charlotte, look to Louisville, look to any other places like that. Don't look to Washington. But and then that all came crumbling down in 2004, 2005, and they had to bail Jeffrey Lurie out, and the rest is history,
Well, and the rest is history, and now we're 15 years into this. They're winning championships. We're going to lose 100 games again next year. Speak to me about the business of what the Washington Nationals are going to do now with their thumb, with their largesse, probably with some tremendous anger, right? I mean, over the last 10 years, the Nationals have been ripped off by Peter Angelos to the tune of $20 to $40 million a year. And that's all still percolating. That's all still out there. Yeah. But now the Nationals have a ring. They have a parade. I would think they'll start flying some billboards in this area because they can and they will. And that the lure would be, if you want to see good baseball, you got to go there. And that's been the case for long stretches of this relationship over 15 years. But certainly where we are right now, where it sits with the Orioles at an all-time low, literally for everything, right? For season tickets, for fan base, for businesses being in all of that. And by the way, Marty, and I know you know this, and I'm going to be writing a lot about this, the real concern for me is, what does this mean for Baltimore? I mean, first off, I never, even in 2005, Peter argued so hard and so long, like the liar he is, that we're protecting Baltimore. I'm rich. This isn't about me. This is about the fans of Baltimore. They built Camden Yards. This isn't fair to Baltimore. That's what it was in 2005. Now that we're 15 years out, Peter's made all the money. Peter's made more money than he would have made had the Nationals not existed. For sure. The Nationals have been a good thing for the Angelos family financially, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars they've made because the Nationals exist. Meanwhile, ask the folks at the Hyatt and the Sheraton, ask the folks at Ruth's Chris, ask the folks at Lexington Market, ask the folks in Baltimore, ask the taxpayers who can't sell their condo 2 blocks away on the 23rd floor. Ask anyone about what it's meant for Baltimore. And boy, Marty, 15 years into this, the Nationals brought a death to my hometown by being well run, right? And by being in the big city and, all of that, right?
Yeah, no, the ode to the Springsteen song is noted there, Death to My Hometown. I appreciate that. So first of all, yes, you're right. What the Nationals have done from a business standpoint, without a supportive media partner, because they've been at odds for, as you said, 10 years or so, is part and parcel to the story, because you tend to find more successful franchises have highly paid, highly integrated media deals that, perform well for them and support that. And they haven't had any of that. There is no direct connection any longer.
Yeah, they have no Yes or no Nesson or no,
Well, there's no business connection. If you look at what Masson runs in terms of Nationals programming, it's nothing that the Nationals would sanction, approve of, et cetera. They would do it 180 degrees different if they had that. They have just literally thrown their hands up and said, we will see you in court and we will figure this out on the other side, which is why ultimately I think the Nationals would petition for the dissolution of Masson in the short and long run, and have Major League Baseball come up with some sort of other formula for them to be allowed to seek their own deal or whatever it is. I think renegotiation is the likely outcome here, but I also think the dissolution of the deal is something that the Nationals, if they had the opportunity, they would put their foot on the throat of the current Masson and try to force that. But we'll see what happens on that front. And so, yes, the other thing that's occurred, excuse me, as a result of hosting the All-Star Game in 2017, now hosting the World Series in 2019, the massive buildup around the stadium footprint in D.C., again, is a game changer, because it has brought new life to the Navy Yard area. It has brought retail there are tens and tens and thousands of square foot of retail, of housing.
Literally billions of dollars.
Condos.
It has literally been billions of dollars that the Nationals have generated. And I live 2 blocks from Camden Yards on the water in Baltimore, and it's a wasteland down here right now for baseball.
And it's the blueprint. Again, you can look in St. Louis at Cardinal City, and there's a couple of other places.
San Diego.
That are doing that.
Yep.
Yeah, doing that, right? That's where the heat is, so to speak, for how a franchise can not just survive, because you can survive without it, but that's how a franchise thrives in a new world. Because there are 2 things that are certain in sports that are, number one is winning expands your base, losing erodes your base. And so what you're going to see, I think, for the next year or so is you're going to see a steady erosion. Now, it's going to be a little bit like politics on digital. You're not going to see it. I don't think you're going to see the visible billboards, the planes flying over, doing things like that. Digitally, they're going to be digging into these surrounding areas and reaching people who have posted on Facebook, who have posted on social media, and now can be found, and now can be targeted, and now can be harvested to come to Washington to spend your baseball dollars, as opposed to come to Baltimore. Again, you will always want to see the Yankees and Red Sox and maybe Houston now that they're there. But any other teams, National League teams, any other interleague play, it will draw people. If Mike Trout were to come to Nats Park, it'd be a huge occasion. And so those are the kind of things that I think will happen, that will continue to take fans, dollars, everything that goes with it, to the point where I think they'll find it difficult here in the next couple of years to draw 1.7, 1.8 million fans. Forget 2 million for a while, because they've currently have gone through such an experience. So the Nationals expanding, clearly it comes at the pie of the Orioles, and as you said in Baltimore, eroding that fan base. And I think what will happen now, or is happening, happened previously, which is some of this fan base just goes dormant. It doesn't go away in Baltimore. It just goes dormant. And you and I have talked about this, and every time we bring it up, it's about frequency when these kind of situations happen. These fans are still there, but they're unlikely to come 3 or 4 times or 5 times to Camden Yards, but they still may come once or twice. They bring the family, they come with an office, they come with a group, or whatever that is. But it's not going to be part of their routine, and that's where you see the numbers change, and that's what hurts you in terms of attendance, concession per capitas, and other types of things. And I think the way around that will be some sort of development areas in and around Camden Yards that directly connect to the ball club and to the ownership, because then they've got things to market beyond just the team, and it can bring those casual fans. And again, the scope and scale of what's happened around Nats Park, and now that there's been a World Series and an All-Star game, people have been exposed to that. They really like it. It appeals to young baseball fans, young men, young women, beer-drinking baseball fans, cocktail-sipping baseball fans. They were there, and that has lit up Washington for baseball, like I think will, and again, depending on how they do over the next year or two and which players they retain, I think you're looking at something that's going to hurt the local Baltimore sports economy, particularly around baseball, for a few years to come, potentially.
Marty, was there ever a point where you were one of those guys, even running the Rangers for George Bush and all that, where you said, yeah, Washington ain't a baseball town. Ain't no way they're going to support it. You know, they lost the Senators to Minnesota. They lost the Rangers and the Senators. I heard that forever, that, yeah, Washington's a transient town. You know, it changes every 4. Ain't no way they're going to support anything but the Redskins. You just said to me, Washington's now a baseball town, and that's something that Edward Bennett Williams never thought, right? That's something that Larry and you never thought, because if you'd thought that and you'd smelled all that money in the 80s, Camden Yards might have never been around. And maybe if Ed was not such a magnanimous individual and the Colts moving to Indianapolis, these are all the things that I went through in the Mount St. Mary's lecture that I really had to after 30 years of doing radio and watching 3.6 million people here back when you built it 30 years ago turn into nothing, but this may have come at the absolute worst time, right? Like, the old man's dying, the kids don't know what they're doing, there's no money here, there's no fans here, there's no talent here, nobody wants to come downtown because of the crime issues because they watch Fox 45 too much, and now the Nationals have this World Series. The fact that there's a team there was something we didn't talk about 15 years ago, but now that there's a competition and there's 23 months left on the lease, and I know you really find that hard to believe after looking at the blueprints 30 years ago and getting the thing built, but there's 23 months left on this lease. You and I have been at this for about 5 years now talking about what happens at the end. You know, Marty, if John hires you right now and says, go down and talk to Larry and the folks down at in Annapolis and let's figure out the new deal for the Orioles in Baltimore. We don't worry about Nashville and Vegas and Portland and Charlotte, Austin, Texas. We're going to keep the Orioles in Baltimore. Let's go negotiate. I don't know what the state even has to give them. I don't know what they're asking for at this point that they haven't already gotten, but I can only imagine what the next 23 months represents, because the media's asleep on this. You know this. You and I. These will be the only words on Baltimore radio that will ever be exchanged about this topic, literally. And tick-tock, tick-tock. Anywhere else, this would be a real problem right now. And to me, I'm looking at it at 50,000 feet, and it feels like a real problem for Rob Manfred right now as much as anybody, as we talk about the Chargers maybe picking up and going off to London. The temperature is there for where is the money in 2020.
Yeah, well, I think, so to your point is, 23 months, a time period of getting to a new lease when this one expires. I don't know specifically, but I'd be willing to put several stacks of quarters on the table that says they're already talking about it, because the time that it takes, the intensive time that it takes to negotiate and draft and get approvals on these things, we're talking about many, many quarters, many months. And so I feel certain that they're probably already engaged, at least in exchanging wish lists and things back and forth. But if you're asking what would be needed, number one, some of the things that need to be done, you and I would never see. The infrastructure plant below where Camden Yards sits is almost antique. And I say that there's not enough high-speed data lines. There's not enough things to make the concession stands and other areas run in the way. That's why you don't see a whole lot of electronic ticketing. You don't see a whole lot of electronic ordering.
This is amazing. I see how bad it is on the baseball side, right? But you're talking about You're talking about the pipes underneath the stadium that we don't see, literally, right?
The backbone that you would need to run some of these high-speed elements now has to be right down Utah Street. That's essentially where that course. So a lot of this will be fought around issues that none of us will ever see. It's like redoing your home. You like to build it beautiful, big new rooms, but you got to think about how electricity and plumbing and all these things factor. That's number one, so I'm sure that's an important part of it. Number two would be the entertainment areas. There's going to have to be new entertainment boards. There's going to have to be all sorts of those ribbon boards and different things are going to have to be brought up to the level where you could sell to a local advertiser something that is 1 minute, something that's 30 seconds, that reflects what they can buy outside the stadium, whether it's on live billboards, whether it's on TV, other elements like that. And then you start to get into the other areas in and around the seating bowl that then people would notice, different types of seats, different structures, entertainment areas, of things. And then where I think the biggest area of upside is the control of some of those real estate areas, the 1 acre here, the 2 acre here, things like that, that the team would have direct influence and control and could then go to developers, make a relationship like the Battery in Atlanta is a perfect example, where 1, 2, or 3 people in terms of entertainment companies and developers can make a huge difference and bring things that bring reoccurring revenues or the opportunity for reoccurring revenues outside of, if you read the quarterly statements from the Atlanta Braves, they actually talk about it now because they're public and they're owned by Liberty Media, and they talk about the difference and how Ed has transitioned and sustained the Braves from just being a baseball team that sometimes wins to becoming an everyday 365-day-a-year entertainment property that's when you're really an entertainment company. Hosting a concert or two, or Billy Joel or something else, doesn't make you an entertainment company. If you want to be in that business, you have to be in it 365. Now, having said that, the biggest advantage is whatever happens to the ownership of the club, whether it stays or transition, what they're going to get from those lease negotiations probably increases the value of the team by somewhere between $50 to $150 million, I would say, just because of the options that they could get in those deals, because that's what investors are going to look at, is not only what the current revenues are, but what are the future revenue opportunities, and what is it going to cost to get that? So I think that's probably where this discussion heads over the next 6 to 12 months. And then, yes, it's going to take at least 12 months to probably get it agreed to, certified, voted on, everything else that has to happen. And then, oh, by the way, during that time, guess what? Maryland's probably going to approve sports betting, so that's going to throw a whole other wave into it as well.
Well, Marty Conway joining us here. You can follow him at Marty Conway out on LinkedIn. He doesn't blog enough, and I'm going to be blogging about this a lot over the next 23 months. Yeah, part of this, for me, Marty, with this negotiation is you're negotiating with the boogeyman, right, like the state, and I don't have a lot of experience with this because most of these negotiations – I don't know, they sort of happen organically when the stadium is built. The renegotiation of 30-year leases in the modern era, there hasn't been a whole lot of that, right? It's always been, let's beat them up and get a stadium built in Philadelphia. All right, it's built. We'll worry about the next 4 mayors from now. We'll have to worry about that. 3 governors from now will have to worry about that. This is sort of the first era, the early 90s of 30-year leases, where all of these things are going to come online. I mean, I've talked to Bengals people. Their thing's up in 26, right? We're hearing about the Chargers now. This would be the glorious era of, well, Portland, Vegas, Nashville, Charlotte, Austin, all these cities that didn't exist 30 years ago as baseball or football or basketball players. I mean, Lord knows Oklahoma City's got a basketball team, right? Like, I don't know how that happened or where it came from, but when the renegotiation happens for an existing modern stadium, and to your point, all of the infrastructure issues that didn't exist in 1991 for Larry Lucchino and Edward Bennett Williams, they're going to exist not just for John Angelos or whomever, but what is the state's role in this to say, here's a free $150 million, John, Mr. Angelos, Mr. Big, whoever owns it. Here's a free $300 million gift from the state. We're going to give you this and that and this and that just because, like, you own a baseball team and you're such a good... I mean, all of that goodwill in the 80s of bringing people downtown, dude, I'm a citizen here. I pay taxes. I'm down. There's nothing about the Orioles that has stimulated commerce where I live over the last 16 years. You know, like where I live, I look at it and say, Light City has brought more people down here this week than the baseball team does on a spring night. And the Patriots coming in brought more Patriots fans than anything I've seen with the Red Sox in 15 years around here. And I say to myself, why would Larry Hogan or whomever's the governor, would it be Larry at this point, why is the state going to give them $200 or $300 million in free? I'm at a time we're trying to get Kerwin and education and crime and all the issues we have governmentally. How is the Angelos family going to do this again? And what's the carrot and what's the stick? I guess is what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, yeah. So this might be just a surprise and lack of focus everyone, but actually the deal struck to build Camden Yards was one of the best public financing deals ever. The amount of money and what it took, and so the amount of money that the state put forth through bonds and then repaid through admission tax, other types of things, they've actually far ahead of, they actually ended up far ahead. The payoff to Camden Yards has been one of the greatest sports development stories in the history, because at the time people said, $100 and some million, that seems like an incredible amount of money. It was actually paid back much faster than the schedule that they had, because again, now the early years, there were a lot of people that piled in and there were a lot of entertainment taxes and different things to do it. So the answer is, what are they going to look to? They're going to look to the past and say, when we pour money, state bonds that we go into Wall Street and sell these bonds, that the repayment, people are going to look at that and say, hey, Camden Yards, for the most part, has been a good investment for us in the past, and we expect it to continue, maybe not at the same rate, because we're not going to see 3.5 or 3 million people at any particular time. But if you look at the funding sources for when public financing occurs specifically for Camden Yards, it was actually a very good deal. So I think the story that the state has when they go to Wall Street to put these bonds out, which might be 200, it's probably going to be twice the amount of money that they put forward to actually build the stadium to do this renovation over, and again, it's not going to be in 1 or 2 years. It's probably going to be over 3, 4, 6 years that it actually occurs.
But this is fascinating. So a group that's made $1.5 billion off the team is now going to go to the state for more free money. Like literally that. Well, after Steve has put his own money into building escalators and whatnot, right?
Yeah, but again, this is the way that it's done. And when leases come up, this is when you have the leverage. And so whether it's the Ravens or the Orioles or the Redskins or Ted Leonsis and his organization, when these leases come to expiration, that's when the leverage is. Now, the Angelos family, and John in particular, has taken the leverage of moving off the table. But having said that, you don't want to have an unhappy tenant in these environments. And so, again, I think the state will do the responsible thing as they look at what this investment has returned to them as actually a good investment. Now, again, not all sports properties are good investments, as we've seen, but in this case, it has been. And so I think the story that they have to sell, which is probably for somewhere north of $200 million, that's going to be paid in to bring the stadium up so that the next 30 years it can host an All-Star game, it can host a World Series, it can host a number of other events that bring new dollars and opportunity to Baltimore, whether it's the next version of Billy Joel or whatever it is. That's what they want to put themselves in position to do, and that's what the money will be used for. And again, I think the story that they have to rely on has been a good story, accelerated payback of these bonds. And so I think when they look at that and they go to the public markets, that will be the story again. So circumstances have certainly changed. There's a new ballpark 30 miles away from this one that's drawing really well. It'll be a challenging story, but I still think it'll be a success for them. That would be my assessment at this point.
Marty Conway, the good professor at Georgetown University, now with the open invitation for the kid from Dundalk to lecture at Georgetown. That would be a day. I don't know if I have a suit that good. Marty, last thing, Chargers to London. This happened close to when we've talked about this. Literally, the story came out on Tuesday morning. You were very quick to say this story was planted. It's very obvious it's planted. And we've been talking about this for a number of years. The Chargers-Packers thing was very, very obvious that, that Chargers thing's not going to work out there. We all knew that, right?
No. Right. Yep. Oh, yeah, it's not. But again, I think they've signed a lease with Stan Kroenke to be a tenant there for 20 or 25 years. For them to extricate themselves or want to extricate themselves or know that if they did, the deal in London would be better, et cetera. Again, I think this is frankly, it's sort of a flag going up because they just played 4 games in London. Now it's time to talk again about what's the future of London. And again, ultimately, Roger Goodell has been very public about building the NFL into a $25 billion entity by 2027. So we're talking about 7 years. That doesn't happen without some sort of club expansion, $2 billion, $3 billion, $4 billion value of doing something in London, I think. Now, again, I think the Jacksonville Jaguars probably have the pole position and first dibs on doing it. They're probably dragging their feet on doing it, and maybe this is the initial forcing factor to try to say, well, if you're not going to go, we're going to have to take steps to award an expansion franchise or potentially move another one. But as bad as the deal is for the Chargers in L.A., and I think it's a very bad deal, I think the likelihood of them taking that franchise and moving it to London is way less likely than either Jacksonville moving or an expansion franchise arriving in London to the tune of $4 to $5 billion, which helps Roger Goodell achieve to his owners that he works for that $25 billion number coming up late in the next decade.
Marty Conway will be lecturing out on the internet and at Georgetown University. You going to Qatar anytime soon? What's happening there? We're getting closer to kicking the ball, right?
They've got a bunch of new events going on. They just hosted the World Track and Field Championships. They're doing the Club World Cup for FIFA. So a number of things that are coming up. So 2020 looks like a likelihood. We just don't have a full schedule yet. But things are. I mean, they're literally now 3 years away, almost next month, from hosting the World Cup. So things have gotten really, really speed it up over there.
Well, next trip when you need a special assistant or someone to help you get up onto a camel, I'm here for you. All right?
They've told me, if you know somebody in Dundalk, bring them. So maybe that would be ultimately, the right connection.
I give good lifts up onto camels. I'm telling you right now. Marty, take care of yourself. We'll see you soon, all right?
Okay, buddy. Thank
Maybe
you.
even Springsteen will have a tour by the time Marty and I get together. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, and never stopping talking about the future of the Baltimore Orioles in Baltimore. Imagine that. Somebody has to do it. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking intelligently about Baltimore sports.